Thanks for coming to this presentation. I hope that you leave here with a lot of insights on what it takes to go on a transformation journey. I call it digital transformation. I think some people call it a data and AI transformation ultimately. But you'll see, I like to say what's old is new. So I've been in this industry I've been working at this for quite a while. And what I've seen in my previous transformations that I've worked on in technology, I'm seeing it again in this space. Okay, so I am Rachel Belino. I work for Mars, and I'm the head of HR data strategy and data engineering. Specifically, I work in a segment called Mars Global Services. When I get to talking about Mars, you're going to understand a little bit more about what that means. I've got over 25 years in HR technology and data. I like to say that I'm at the intersection of tech and data in the HR space. I've always worked in human resources, so it's my specialty and my focus. I've had the benefit of working for a lot of great companies over my career across many different industries. Before I came to Mars, I was working at Akamai, which is 30% of the world's internet traffic runs through Akamai, and I know that they did a couple presentations here at this conference. I also have experience working for PTC, which was in CAD/CAM and Internet of Things, and then before that, healthcare networks, as well as publishing. So I've got a really good array of industries under my belt. And here with me to present is Sreeharsha of the Math Company.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everyone. My name is Sreeharsha Alagani. I work for the Math Company, work as an associate principal in engineering. So I bring in over a decade of experience, primarily in building data and cloud solutions. So you'd be wondering what the Math Company is doing here. So here's the story. So we've been partnering with the Mars team for quite some time. A little bit of intro about the Math Company as well. So we are a global data analytic and engineering firm. So we focus on building data and engineering and data science solutions, primarily partnering with Fortune 500 and equivalent organizations. So you see a lot of accolades here. We don't have to go through much of that, but our focus area is more towards building data engineering, data science solutions that can help solve business problems. And in the current context, we've been working with Mars for over 5 years now. But in the past 1 year, we've been primarily working with Rachel and team in building the data platform for the HR and P&O organization. So with that, I'll pass it back to Rachel to talk more about Mars side of the story.
All right. So I hope many of you have heard about Mars as a company. It's a fantastic company to work for. We're really pleased that we're on Glassdoor's Best Places to Work. We're headquartered in McLean, Virginia, but I myself am based in New Jersey. We're operating in over 80 plus countries all over the world, and we've got offices spread out everywhere. We're a privately owned family business that's been around for over a century. So lots of history, lots of legacy there. And we're really proud of our billion-dollar brands. You'll know some of them, like M&M's and Snickers, as well as many people don't know this, but we're also in pet care and pet food. So IAM's, Pedigree, Caesar, those are some of our billion-dollar brands. And for those of you that have pets, maybe you take them here in the United States to Banfield. That's one of our vet hospitals, as well as VCA, which is out here in California, and we even have some vet hospitals overseas in Asia as well as Europe. So we're a large company, very global. We've got over 140,000 associates, which we call our employees at Mars. And one thing that we're very proud of are our 5 principles, which we live, eat, and breathe every day. We don't just say it, it's not just lip service. Every day we look to see how we can embed those 5 principles in everything that we do. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that I work in a segment at Mars, which is comprised of many different segments. I work specifically in Mars Global Services, and basically our goal is how do we enable the business to focus on the growth? I think you may have heard of the concept of global business service lines. When I attended the talk by Michelin earlier in the week, they were talking about their setup as well, which is very similar to ours. And in this particular segment, we have over 3,000 associates that are essentially helping the business focus on growth. So we free up the time for our associates to focus on what they do best. What's really cool about what we do as a segment is you can see that we've got 525 digital workers amongst the 3,000 actual Martians that do the work. And those digital workers are our bots, our automation that we've put into place to do a lot of the manual processes for our associates to help improve their efficiency. And then we've done so much great work in the shared services space that we are really proud that for the 4th consecutive year in a row, we've been recognized as one of the top 20 most admired shared services organizations in the world. So we're really proud of our efforts there. Okay. All right, so people analytics. So how many of you here in the room work in HR or work in HR analytics or yeah? See a couple of hands. Okay, great. All right, and for those of you that do not, hopefully this is giving you a good primer on that area. So I offer up the Gartner definition of people analytics. I think it's pretty good. It's nice and succinct. It's the collection and application of talent data to improve critical talent and business outcomes. But what does that exactly mean? What does that look like in practice? So here at Mars, we, through people analytics, look to drive the hire to retire strategy. And we do it along the whole entire employee life cycle. So we've got the attract stage, the planning stage, the enable stage, the engagement, grow, as well as retain. I won't go through all of this because in and of itself, it's a whole discipline, definitely warrants its own presentation, to do it justice. But I'll touch upon the areas, and I always like to touch upon the ones that are near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time, in HR technology working on the first part, which is attraction. How do you attract the best talent, the right people with the right skills at the right time? And here what we're doing in analytics is, when you look at where your hiring channels are and you're looking at, seeking to put your investments there, where are you getting the best hires? That's what we try to look at when we look at the data so that we can put our investments into that area. Another area that's near and dear to me is engaging. So how do we understand the engagement of our associates at any point in time? Traditionally that's done once a year with an annual survey, but this is really about how do you listen to your associates all of the time so that you can understand their engagement levels and then you can actually take action on that. And then the last one that I'll point out is retain. I am very much about, how do you retain that great talent that you have in an organization once you have it? So this is about setting them up for success, what are the factors that go into that, and then also, can we predict attrition? Can we get ahead of it? Can we create those alert mechanisms in place and help the managers retain their great talent? So that's a little bit about people analytics. We have a great team at Mars in the people analytics area, comprised of business translators as well as data scientists and data analysts that are doing this work. But what I'd like to talk to you about is, that's the cool side. The output and the analytics are the cool side. What does it take to actually enable that to happen? And that's all about a good data foundation, the fundamentals. So that's where my team comes into play. It's called the Global People Data Office. And I'll go through the areas that we work on to give you a sense of the team that we have in place. So the first part is data engineering. When I came to this summit a year ago, this is my second summit, but when I came to my first summit, I did not know, to be honest, what data engineering was. And I was meeting all of these people that were data engineers and data scientists, and it clicked. It clicked when I was looking at the landscape that we have, and I said, what we're missing? We're missing this whole band of really critical people that actually build and deliver the data that's needed for data science. So now, luckily, I have a data engineering team. What we do here is we've got our data platform, which we'll talk about later on in this presentation. We gave it a name. It's called Paddle. It's the People Analytics Data Lake ecosystem. It's really, every company, right, has their acronyms. We think this one's pretty cool. It goes in line with a data lake, water, paddling, etc. Yeah. Here, what we do is we really focus on that ELT process, right? That ingestion and transformation of the data all the way through to making it consumable and high quality for our data consumers. We really focus a lot on accessibility and reusability of our data sets, and we'll go into that a little bit more later on so you can understand what that means. Hand in hand with our data engineering team is a data governance team under my remit. So in this team, we partner with folks like Master Data Management. We've got Colibra that we're using for our data definition and data lineage platform. We've called it the Mars Data Wiki internally, right? So that people can relate to that and go there and easily find the data that they're looking for. We are also working cross-functionally, not just within HR, but also with the other functions like finance, for example, to come up with what are those cross-functional data definitions that need to be harmonized and standardized across their functions so that we're all talking the same language. And we mean the same thing when we use certain terms. We also provide self-service capabilities for HR. This is about promoting data literacy so that we can ultimately achieve that goal of data democratization that you've heard here at the conference. So it's about how do you give visibility to the organization into the HR data that you have, and then also educate them on how they can use it. And last but not least, we try to make things simpler. So one of the biggest asks that I have all of the time of my team is, how can we get at the data? How can we use the data? What is that specific data point? And this is what my team spends a lot of time on. Okay, data quality. I'm sure everybody in this room has probably had somebody say to them, oh, data quality is an issue. We really need to work on it. You absolutely need it to be part of your critical focus when you're trying to ultimately enable all of the great analytics, because essentially, how are people going to trust what you're saying? How are they going to trust the insights that you're giving them if you don't have high quality data? So my team focuses specifically on this, and part of the challenge there is how do you make it, first of all, visible to them what the data quality issues are. People talk about it, but when you can be very precise about what the actual issues are, then that's really, I think, a game changer. Helps people really think about, okay, how can we correct it and prevent it from happening in the future? Data security is also under my remit. So in my team, we've got the functional design and operations for our core HR system, which is Workday Security. We also consult with the other teams when it comes to how to keep the HR data secure, because once you have HR data, it will always be needed downstream by other systems. And we have a great responsibility in trying to make sure that you still secure that data even after you've given it downstream to other consumers. And last but not least is privacy. So we partner really, really closely with our data privacy team, so legal counsel. One of the challenges I had right in the beginning when I accepted this role was we want to do people analytics, but the privacy team won't allow us to do anything with the data. So one of the first things I did in the first year was sat down and understood with the data privacy team, how can we actually do this analysis, but within the safeguards? How do we do this to be legally compliant, but then how do we ultimately respect the privacy of our associates and our candidates? So we established guardrails within which we can operate, and that really allowed us the freedom to be able to do analytics. Okay. All right, so our transformation story. I've mentioned this right at the beginning, but what is digital transformation and what is it really about? So I'm sure you have seen this image before, but it really is about changing radically, about that metamorphosis that you go through, that evolution that you go to go from one state to another. But this is what most companies think it is. I hope there's some of you in this room that have been through that journey, right? You've been told, hey, let's get this going fast, do it overnight, supercharge this, let's go to the next stage really quickly. And that is kind of what people think it is, strap the boosters onto the back of the caterpillar and hopefully it will transform. Okay, so I will show you what it's like to go on a metamorphosis, right? To go from the caterpillar to the butterfly. So our evolution. You know, in the beginning, we started this journey back in 2020, so now it's coming up on 3 years. That should already tell you how difficult and challenging it is, just in terms of time. So we established the people analytics function back in early of 2020. I was one of the first roles that they hired into the team because the leader at the time had such great foresight from engaging with consulting firms to understand what does good look like. And they said, you know, to do all that cool stuff that you're talking about, which is people analytics, you really need a data engine that will power the data that's needed for all of those insights. And to do that, you really need a leader that can actually make that happen. So thankfully, it was one of the first roles that they hired, part of that initial staffing. And when I started, I had this grand vision. I said, we need a system-agnostic data platform on which we can consolidate all of the HR data as well as other data to empower analytics at scale, not just for HR and for the enterprise. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Sounds absolutely lovely, and it is. So I first, as a technologist, went straight to the platform. That was one of my first mistakes. You know, I said, okay, we got to get the platform up and running. I partnered with IT, and we actually started that first initial build. So we had a Microsoft Azure subscription in the cloud. You know, we started saying, okay, we've set it up. We experienced a period of growth in 2021. And I was so happy when we started our first initial data ingestion. So we took the data from our legacy HR system and that we were replacing at the time, and we put it into Paddle. And then we were also taking specific data sets to power specific use cases like Power BI dashboards that showed like key performance indicators for HR like headcount and turnover. We started ingesting that, and I thought, this is awesome. We are on our way. We have arrived. So towards the end of 2021, I realized that it was taking really, really long to do those data ingestions. It was taking us months instead of days or weeks. And also, once we got the data into the platform, we weren't transforming it any further. So essentially, it was sitting there in a raw layer, and then people were coming to us and trying to use it, and then they couldn't use it because all it was a bunch of files with data in it, with no documentation and no ability to, you know, understand how to join it. So I knew we were in trouble at that point, yeah? And then this is where the transformation happens. So at the end of 2021, imagine this, essentially, dare I say it, we had a data swamp, right? Data went in, data couldn't come out, data couldn't be consumable. So I said, let's pause for a second and let's evaluate. So Mars has a great ecosystem of partners, a fantastic ecosystem of partners, one of which is the math company. I said, let's talk to the partners and let's really understand, does what we have right now, is that what good looks like? I'm not so sure anymore. So we did that evaluation, and we went with one big partner to do the evaluation. Accenture was part of that journey, and I'm pointing to, there's an Accenture person here. But I wanted a second opinion, because at this point I had been, now I'm like, I'm not so sure anymore. I wanted a second opinion. So I brought in a boutique consulting firm, and both of these firms showed me what good looked like. And it turned out that's not what we had. So at this point we pivoted and we said, okay, let's move towards that vision of what good looks like. And essentially what happened at the time, which was the game changer, was we made a decision that our first version of that data stack was not fit for purpose, and so we needed to move to a new one. So we said, we'll do it. The second part was IT made a great decision, which was let's federate ownership and accountability for the data stack out to the business, which meant they also federated my piece over to HR. And that really, when that happened, that was like a huge and sudden uplift in what we could do. because they essentially empowered us to take full ownership and accountability over it. And I think you've heard it here at this conference where when you think about where to position your resources that are working on the actual outcomes, for example, your data engineering team, your platform engineering, all of your data scientists, you want them as close to the business as possible. And that's essentially what IT empowered us to do. So roughly about the middle of the year is when ownership shifted, and also that's when I came to this conference as well, right? So it was like a big awakening for me. The first thing that I did is I evaluated the partners in our space, the ones that we were using previously with IT, and then decided it was time for a change. So we brought in new partners, one of which is the math company, as well as other partners as well to really help us on the journey. And then we started the migration to our second version of the data stack. And then the last piece that we did, which is really, really important, I mentioned to you that a year ago I didn't know what data engineering was. So we actually established the data engineering team and also the processes that go along with it. So we adopted that concept of bronze, silver, gold that's espoused by Databricks. And so that's what we have in terms of our transformation process. And then another piece that we did at the beginning of this year is, once we had the initial team in place in terms of data engineering, we entered a managed service contract to really help us accelerate the journey at scale. So that means end-to-end, we had not just data engineering, but also analytics engineering and data science, all under a managed service contract with a partner. And then that's when we expanded the team pretty exponentially in order to accomplish everything that we wanted to do. We also restarted our migration from our version 1 to version 2, and I'm happy to say that in about a month, we'll be live on that new version. So it's going to be a big win for us. And then where I see us for the rest of this year is really about stabilizing what we've created. Now that we've stood this up, how do we stabilize that? How do we make sure we have some nice continuity in terms of the data operations that we've set up? So next year is looking really, really great, 2024. When I look at it, I think about how can we optimize what we've built? How can we optimize that consumption layer, which I haven't talked about yet, but you'll see that in a second. How do we reduce our costs, our overall costs in terms of the data stack? And then also, how do we optimize our data engineering process? So right now, we've got our timeframes of how long it takes us to ingest and transform specific data sets. So now that we have that baseline, how do we reduce that time to market? How do we get it to be even faster? And I'm really excited about some of the things that I saw here at this conference because I see pieces in there that we can really go after and implement along with the people in the process, and that will help us along this journey. So the other pieces that are on here that we want to pursue in the next year is, of course, what everybody is talking about, but how can we implement our use cases for AI? And then also, now that we've got our foundation set up, how do we implement the practice of ML ops so that we've got that streamlining in place? Okay, so what does Paddle look like? This is a very simple, abstract of what the platform looks like today. You'll see here in the bottom layer that we've got all of our source systems from which we're ingesting data from the past to the present, as well as our future roadmap. And in the middle is Paddle, where we're actually doing all of the magic. That's where we've got our storage layer, which is on Azure, but then we're also using Databricks for our processing. And then at the top is that consumption layer that I spoke about. So here we've got Power BI dashboards that are showcasing a lot of our KPIs in HR, but then also we've got applications that are visualizing the data in very useful ways for our stakeholders. A great example I have there is security. Since that's under my team, we've been able to visualize Workday security in an application. That's a very difficult thing to do for any of you here that work in HR and know Workday. And then we've also got an idea engine, which is essentially a custom application that we've built that we're just about to go live with it, but we'll put it in front of our HR end users. And it's really meant to help them think through what could be the potential hypothesis that they'd like to come up with that's solving their business problem. And then, of course, on the right, we've got our data science team that's working on all of the predictive models on that hire to retire strategy. Okay, so let me turn it over to Sri, and he can give you the technical perspective on all of this.
Thank you, Rachel. So this is the, the technical view of the previous architecture that Rachel talked about, right? So before we jump into some key components of this architecture, so when we started this journey of the, overall transformation along with Rachel's team, there were some challenges that, we have clearly identified, which Rachel talked about in the previous slides. One, the time to value for the data that comes from the upstream systems all the way to the downstream applications was high. The trust in the quality of the data, was very low. And more importantly, the process on how the governance happens in this overall system, like how the data is retrieved from upstream systems, and then how are we guarding the principles of how to make sure the data is usable, reusable and available to users was also another challenge there. So the way that we looked at this architecture is that not to set up a data platform that consolidates the data so that everybody can consume or build data on top of it, but take a data architecture that works best for the scenario, but at the same time look at it more from a data product standpoint, right? So that there is immediate value to the data that we are bringing in. There is a business team who's ready to, ready to consume the data from there on. But at the same time, following the guiding principles of ensuring data quality, data governance, democratizing the data, and then making sure that the data is discoverable and so on. Some of the, if you look at it, the way that we can segment this architecture is in three ways, right? You have an ingestion, and then you have a transformation, and finally, there is a consumption piece of it. One thing very, not peculiar but not uncommon when working with the HR data is that the data completeness and the data accuracy are few things I would say, was a little bit challenging given that the upstream sources, are either semi-structured or unstructured data sources. So majority of the work has been about how do we bring that data together, how do we consolidate that data, bring that into a common format, which is where majority of the heavy lifting here has happened through the Databricks. And all of the ingestion has been streamlined through the Azure Data Factory pipelines today, given that much of the data has been batch processes, but we are looking forward to also adding, a streaming kind of a solution for it when it comes to data ingestion. Now, when it comes to the actual transformation, right, so we started with bringing the data to the Azure Data Lake, ADLS, but then immediately we've definitely realized the value of bringing the medallion architecture in place here. Like bring the whole source from, whole data from the sources, but then define the guiding principles on what makes the data move from bronze to silver, and then from silver to gold, and eventually from gold to another semantic layer. I'll talk about it there. But what we've also realized here is to set up delta lakes eventually on top of it, because we have identified redundant systems in the overall architecture. Now, our primary use case for bringing the data together here is to make sure the data is available for end business users to build products on it. Second, enable self-service analytics. Now, all of that final data, the semantic layer data, was residing in SQL, but we are able to set up delta lakes on top of our ADLS so that we can reduce the redundant software there, thereby reducing the overall cost as such. Today, all the Power BI dashboards are in the process of connecting to delta lakes, directly reading the data there and so on. What we eventually have is a transformation for some of these reports as well. In addition to this, what we are also looking forward to is to set up the ML ops, but use the ML flow that helps in monitoring the models, monitoring the performance of the models, monitoring the drift, and so on. So that's primarily, what we have here. And then when it comes to few of the important things that we have in terms of the roadmap, we're looking at adding the capability of generative AI that can directly read the data from the data lakes and delta lakes, which can enable new use cases from here on. So this is still at a very high level, I would say, given though we have worked on this for the past 1.5 years, But we are here to answer any more technical questions that you have, and also Rachel can answer more from a HR standpoint. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Sri. Okay, so just some closing thoughts before we open it up for questions. Hopefully I think you can see that the transformation journey is long and it's difficult and it's challenging. Any advice I give to people in the room that are starting on that journey is be prepared for it. Start it now. Also think about pace over perfection, because you can see that in my journey, that was certainly the case. It was not perfect. You're going to learn along the way, but the best thing to do is start. And then I would say hopefully you've got some great, strong leadership at the top that can support you in this, because you certainly need that support from executive sponsorship, because you'll need patience along the way, because you'll be perhaps delivering some not great news along the way about how things are going or not going well. And expect that to happen, right? Expect going from caterpillar to butterfly. It is a complete radical change. And especially in today's world where all of the technology is changing all of the time, it's really going to boil down to, the talent that you have and the processes that you have in place, and not just the tech and not just the platform. All right, so we can open it up to questions. Feel free to connect with me. There's the QR code to get to my LinkedIn. And I can also put you in touch with the math company if you're looking for a partner.